Hello everyone. So I do believe that we are now live. So firstly, thanks to everyone for joining the discussion today. So my name is Mark Giles and I'll be your host kicking things off before I hand over to Tess Korthout, who is our moderator and leading today's discussion. So we also have the following panelists: Jimmy Garza, Senior Director, Country Head US Site Management for Bayer; Domenico Merante, Global Clinical Development, Vifor Pharma; Srinivas Jakka, Principal Product Manager, Evidence Generation and Drug Safety for Genentech; and Edwin Klumper, Co-Founder, Chairman of the Board for iClusion. And finally, our moderator, Tess Korthout, Business Development Manager for iClusion. So it goes without saying, we're very excited to have everyone here today, and I hope you find it a really interesting discussion, which is focusing on driving innovation to accelerate clinical oncology trials. So before we start, I'd just like to take a quick minute just to remind attendees you've joined in listen-only mode, which means that you're muted. There are various areas within the system I would encourage you to use. There is a section for Q&A where you can log your questions for the host, the moderator, or the panelists. I would encourage you to drop the questions in there at any point. We will take Q&A towards the back end of the session, but please do add them in as soon as you can. We'll also get the opportunity to watch the session again. So we do have a playback feature and you will receive a copy of that post-event. We'll also have a polling session which will launch throughout. So just a couple of key questions for you. Please do, I would encourage you to answer those polling questions as well. It just provides and offers a little bit more insight into the discussion. So finally, your feedback is very important. So I do encourage you to fill out the post-event survey as well. Now this will enable us to shape the future events and ensure we deliver maximum value to the audience, and it really will help future collaborations. So without further ado, I'll turn you over to Tess Korthout, who is our moderator for the session. Over to you, Tess.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, and also from my end, welcome everyone. Really exciting to join this discussion today. So my name is Tess Korthout and I joined iClusion in January this year as the Business Development Manager. And as Mark said, I will be moderating the discussion with these great set of speakers today. So as iClusion is a young and ambitious company, we are very interested in innovative technologies for clinical trials. And therefore, I'm super excited to dive into specifically this topic today. However, the interesting thing is that, I'm trying to go to the second slide. Yeah, so interestingly, in the past year, we've heard a lot of innovation in clinical trials. But the interesting thing is that for oncology, it's actually a little bit more challenging and more specific. First of all, because there's often a more specific patient population with, for example, specific mutations that are a bit more rare to find. Second of all, oncology trials are often rather complex and also often hospital bound. So that's very interesting that all these new innovations require extra attention for oncology. So I'm really excited today to really dive into this topic specifically and discuss the opportunities to overcome these challenges. And before I introduce the panel, I'd like to take a few words and quickly explain what iClusion does and how the unique approach of iClusion that we take to tackle the problem of patient recruitment in oncology. So I think we all know this statistic that only 5% of the patients actually participate in oncology clinical trials. And therefore, over 80% of the clinical trials are delayed. And in the end, this is the biggest problem for the patient because it delays access to new treatment. So iClusion solves this problem in a very unique way. So we solve this by digitally connecting study sites, but also oncologists, by what we call our Trial Eye network. So within this network, oncologists are exposed to all active oncology trials and therefore stimulated to refer their patients to the best trial. But more importantly, we also harmonize and digitize the process of local study startup. And this really makes it possible to include a lot more study sites in your research, either to include more study sites for your entire study, so really extra study sites, but also these sites, this network can be used to pre-screen patients or just take over specific parts of the study closer to the home of the patients, for example, safety measures. And thereby, this drastically increased the number of patients for oncology trials that can be included. So that was about iClusion. But of course, the biggest benefit, as I said, is for patients. If oncology trials are faster, this is the biggest win for the patient. But in order to truly make this happen, we cannot do this alone. We have to collaborate. And that is why we are so passionate about this roundtable today. And we're really looking forward to hearing all the different perspectives from the different panelists. But not only from the panelists itself, but also from you. So therefore, I'm also very curious to hear what the audience has to say about this topic. So we will launch a poll question that is specifically because we're definitely interested in what your biggest challenge in oncology recruitment specifically is. So we are launching a poll question, but if there's any other specific answer that is not in the answers listed, I would strongly encourage you to type this in the chat. And also during the entire panel discussion, I would be really excited if you answer any points or any questions that you have for either the entire panel or a specific panelist. And as Mark said, we'll take these answers by the end, take these questions by the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce the panelists. Let me first, before I forget, stop sharing my screen. Yes. Yeah, so with this, I really like to ask each panelist, I mean, I can give a great introduction, but I think everyone is more interested if the panelists do it themselves. So I'd like to kick it off with Jimmy. Could you please take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Tess. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today. My name is Jimmy Garza. As Mark said, I'm the U.S. country head for U.S. Oncology Site Management with Bayer. Been in industry for over 20 years and started in very small beginnings as a coordinator, worked my way through up and have seen different variations of the industry at the site level, university level, CRO level, and now it's sponsor. So I think we can all appreciate how we want to approach clinical trials within oncology, especially with the patient need. That's most important, I think, what drives most of us and why we're here today. So thank you all again.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy. Maybe Domenico, can you take over?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Domenico Merante. I'm a medical doctor physician by training. I graduated at University of Pisa and specialized at University of Pisa in Tuscany, Italy. Since 1994, I had the fortune to work as a physician in the pharma development environment, working in Italy, UK, couple of years in US, and now a couple of years in Switzerland, across all phases of clinical development, globally or nationally or regionally. And I've been lucky to be involved in projects which were successful with good medicines brought to the market at a different level. My current role is a Vifor Pharma research lead of nephrology and rare disease. And I've been now in this role for the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Domenico. And next is maybe Srinivas. Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Tess. Hello and welcome again to this virtual roundtable meet. My name is Srinivas Jakka, and I serve as the product manager at Genentech-Roche. I work closely with the evidence generation and drug safety departments at Genentech. So in my 4 years with the company, I have worked with AI and machine learning applications, especially in the clinical trial space and adverse events. I have over 15 years of experience working in technology firms, so pharma is kind of new to me. But the very fact that we produce drugs that help improve the lives of people is motivating enough to work in this company. So I'm really excited to be on this panel with such distinguished guests and to share Genentech's approach and initiatives to accelerating clinical trials during COVID. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot. And last but not least, Edwin, could you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Tess. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm the founder of iClusion, also a physician by training with a PhD in leukemias. And I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I worked in small biotech and in big pharma company in different functionalities from medical, marketing, sales, senior management. And what really drives me is the science, which greatly took a boost after the sequencing of the full genome project. And it's mind-blowing how cancer research is evolving around the globe. But the most important thing is how can we turn this fantastic science into new treatments? And therefore we need clinical trials. So after my career, the last 15 years, I've really focused on clinical trials, where you try to use the innovations, the new science, the new drugs. How can you put them into good clinical trials? And for that reason, I founded an oncology specialized CRO, because I saw that you really need to be specialized in oncology to run the trials well. So I founded SMS Oncology, saw a lot of companies, biotech and pharma. Two drivers really are patient recruitment and the right data, because they need to build your package. These are two value drivers. There was a merger of the company in 2019 with Cato from the US. So it went on as Cato SMS Oncology, SMS. And I stepped out of the equation and founded iClusion. And the passion really is, like you said in your last slide, Tess, is I've seen that a lot of trials, especially pushed by COVID now, run out of time, run out of budget, become more complex. We need to find more trials, more patients for those trials. And on the other hand, I've been approached by patients myself in my network, where patients need a experimental treatment because the standardized therapy doesn't work, and they ask me for advice. So I thought, how can I kill two birds with one stone? The industry is lacking patient recruitment, finding the right patients and including them. And finding the right patients is not recruitment. It does not equal. We try to solve that problem. And then on one hand, how can we engage more patients into clinical trials? Because there is an untapped potential there. And that has been the driving force between why we founded iClusion. And we really try to help with all stakeholders in the field, with the pharmaceutical industry and biotechs on one hand. So we have distinguished guests here, and together with oncologists, trial managers, and also patients, to build this machine that we can help with digital improvements to really boost those clinical trials and get better data faster. So we move the innovation at a faster pace, becoming more accessible to more patients, which is at the advantage of the pharma and biotech industry also. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Edwin. Yeah, already very excited to hear your intros. So let's kick it off with the main topic of this panel. As we mentioned already, the COVID pandemic has really significantly impacted clinical trials. I think we can all attest to that. However, it also brought a lot of new technology, innovation, and opportunities. So my first question will be to the entire panel. I will ask this to everyone. So it's especially about these opportunities. So what have you seen in clinical trials in general, but also in oncology? How have you, what technology innovations have you seen? And how can we leverage these insights post-pandemic? So maybe I will do the same order. So Jimmy, can you kick it off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tess. I think all of us can appreciate how COVID has impacted the acceleration of the digitization of our industry. I think we were probably all thinking this was 5 years down the road as far as the next iteration and progression of clinical trials. But with COVID really accelerating that, it forced a lot of us to look at clinical trials very differently in oncology. I think it starts with the sites. They really had to step up to ensure patients would receive these experimental therapies. I think by realizing their own electronic and digital capabilities, partnering with sponsors in ways that we really hadn't done before. So I think that was a very surprising effect of what COVID had done. And also too, from a regulatory standard, I will say in the US, the FDA really partnered with the industry and revise their guidelines when it came to the conduct of oncology clinical trials. Otherwise, I think we would be very limited, which unfortunately would impact patients. I would say from those perspectives, that's how we've seen COVID-19 really impact our industry in oncology specifically.
Thanks. So, Domenico, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I recently looked into some sources and realized how big the impact of COVID has been across all therapeutic areas, but in particular oncology. I've seen in 2020, this is a source on clinicaltrials.gov, that 21% of clinical trials in oncology have been stopped or prematurely terminated, affecting a large number of patients. So is a very, very relevant impact. These patients are always, we must remember, suffer from their condition, that is cancer, and that is very, very important to always remember. In addition to that, they always also had this last couple of years this challenge of having to be enrolled or be retained in clinical trials. So the impact has been absolutely massive. And obviously, it's good that we are talking today about the opportunities, what we can do as clinical developers to improve, overcome these challenges, and see what is in our hands already that can allow us to do so, to make life of these people easier in terms of coming to clinical studies.
And are there any specific innovations, technologies that you have seen? Indeed, as Jimmy mentioned, that you thought, oh, this will be only in a few years, but that you've already seen established due to the pandemic?
I have worked extensively in the neuropathic pain area, which is cross-sectional, so affects very much also patients with cancer. And one direct experience I have, which is actually pre-COVID era, but is very much applicable nowadays, even more during the COVID and post-COVID pandemic, is the use of the electronic devices for capturing, so the EPRO systems to capture through electronic diaries all the quality of life measures, which are typically in reporting as primary or most frequently secondary outcomes and endpoints in our clinical studies. And I have to say the impact on these electronic devices has been absolutely relevant in terms of minimizing the issue of data loss, for instance, and improving the quality of the data at the end of the trials. And I'm talking about a very large program I have worked on in fibromyalgia with over 4,000 patients enrolled globally. And this is just few years before the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, indeed. I think the rise of electronic capturing is only growing. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Srini, for you, the same question. So, what technologies have you seen in sites in the US, especially, I guess?
Sure. Thank you so much for asking, Tess. So at Genentech, we conduct studies in all tumor types. So in a lung cancer study that we executed recently, we noticed that if there is a breathtaking therapy or a competing drug already on the market, patients tend to take that drug instead of enrolling in our studies, simply because the results are not available. Also, the type of drug that we're using has an impact on finding patients. So like I said, yes, we find it even more difficult to enroll during COVID because patients do not want to go to the site, and several sites have deprioritized oncology studies or have taken less studies. Also, shortage of nurses and physicians have compounded the recruitment rate and resourcing issues, right? We've also seen that some studies need additional assessments like the PD-L1 study or the HER2 breast cancer study, which needs special equipment. And we've also seen that phase 3 studies are the ones that we are most impacted. So to mitigate these issues, we have approached this problem both from a design process as well as from a technology front. So to start with, we have included COVID language in the protocol, which is shared with all the sites that are contracted. Protocols now include verbiage for remote monitoring. Protocols have been simplified, and now we critically question the inclusion-exclusion criteria and other conditions to ensure that the protocol is set up for success. So sites are made aware of special situations. So this also expedites the IRB process as much as we can. So we try to keep the protocol simple to reduce the number of amendments that we can make. So that's on the process perspective. So we have used technology to identify sites and investigators that have the most potential to run the studies for us. So to this effect, we built a site selection tool that uses AI and machine learning to identify good sites and principal investigators. So we have also built study monitoring tools to predict enrollment that allow us to make strategic decisions about sites and investigators. On the contracting side, we use the existing relationships with sites as much as we can. We do not look out for new sites during COVID, not that we don't want to, but we tend to use sites that have institutional level CDAs. So if they already have a contract with us, we tend to use that site more often so we can reduce the time spent on contracting. We are partnering with sites that are able to recruit underserved and underprivileged patients. So we use both publicly available data sources, in-house data sources to identify areas with a high percentage of this diverse population and the sites that can serve them. So to this effect, we have built data lakes in-house to assemble this information so it's easily accessible to everyone. And more so, we are looking for MSLs to influence the sites so they can prioritize our studies. And yes, we are looking for decentralized trials as much as we can. So we use local hospitals to run for lab work and for more sophisticated equipment. Obviously, patients have to visit the site. Using decentralized model, patients do not have to go to the site that often. I'm told it's like once every 6 weeks. But yes, the decentralized model is working pretty well as the at-home model where nurses do the remote monitoring and send the survey results back to the hospital. Thanks.
Interesting. So just a quick question about these about this decentralization. So I can imagine indeed that a community site cannot always take over everything of the study. So is this something that has been more of interest due to the pandemic, and are there particular trials for which this is more applied, or is Genentech applying it to all of these studies? Is it always on the radar?
It is always on the radar, but it has accelerated during COVID. And obviously not for oncology trials. I mean, we cannot go to a full decentralized mode. We use a hybrid model, where it's a combination of remote and occasional site visits. For at-home monitoring, like or testing, like local lab testing, glucose monitoring, phone calls, surveillance, yes, we have adopted the at-home healthcare model, and that seems to work for some studies, but not for all. Oncology, where sophisticated equipment is required, yes, so we have to have the patients visit the hospital. But I would like to mention one more thing, that we have initiated programs such as the Right Health program to support patients who are unable to visit the site, whether it's due to a job loss or other reasons. So we have partnered with vendors who provide a door-to-door service and accommodation for out-of-state patients. So in some cases, we have also provided childcare services to alleviate the burden. So yeah, we have increased partnerships with sites, and we look for sites with big networks, with local hospitals. So we partner with those sites and use technology as much as possible. I'm told we also use Facebook and Zoom for remote monitoring of patients. So yeah, together with e-consent, which makes it easier for the patient so they can sign remotely. Obviously, not all institutions accept this, but we tend to favor those institutions that participate in the e-consent program. And yes, we use the Right Health app more and more during COVID, so we can bring the patients to the site. They're reluctant to go to the site. But yes, we make all those arrangements.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot for these insights, Srini. So maybe Edwin, can you maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure if everything is already said, but do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can just summarize that indeed trials have been stopped. The start of new trials have been postponed, which now is a kind of mountain that needs to be recouped, so to say. Ongoing trials, of course, had to go on because patients were in treatment, but that was also a little bit jeopardized because then the study sites really had to, on a logistical level, with all the arrangements, how to avoid COVID and contamination, you know, it was really a challenge for the sites to just maintain the running rate of the current studies. And so you also saw that the recruiting new patients was sometimes also hampered through that. And we are now getting back into the mode where COVID is not done yet. So still for instance, in the Netherlands, I don't know exactly the other countries, but still we are running on high levels of intensive care, which is postponing some of the care of normal other treatments like cancer surgery or heart surgery. So we're still not done yet, but I think we are over the hill and there is more room. Now the physicians and especially the trial managers have to deal with a lot of catch up. And what we have tried to do with our system is that for the big pharmas, you have a kind of full equipment, you have full power. You, like Srini said, you have a network with standing contracts. For biotech, it's difficult because they have to outsource there's that running trials. So what we have done is we have harmonized, standardized, and digitalized the whole startup procedure, as well as contracting, as well as finding the right financing. So we have a financing tool that we can make sure that all biotechs will not pay too much and all the hospitals will make a decent little upside potential, and so they can run their trials, which and therefore we have seen with certain customers that processes of starting up new trials where you will take fast 6 months, but it could endure up to 12 months or even longer if you have to go through contracting, negotiation, and the law departments. By standardizing it with full contract hospitals, we can speed that up to 2 months. So that's really a huge gain where it helps. Finding the right patients is another thing where, forced by the COVID, in collaborations with others, we have in the Netherlands, there is a whole genome sequencing project, which is also supported by the government in the Netherlands Cancer Institute. We are collaborating there. So if patients are going through puncture and they get whole genome sequencing, genetic aberrations will be found and they will be automatically linked in our database to trials that are running on those genomic aberrations, so that the physician is informed that there is a patient with a genetic aberration and there is a potential study. So these are kinds of where digital technologies can help each other. The big question is, through COVID, working at home and the digital revolution, if you look at the stock share for Zoom or other companies, they've gone through the roof. It works. Nothing beats face-to-face interactions by physicians and doctors. You need that for trust, also in the business. But it supports really a great deal. The question now is, will the hospitals really engage and endorse the new digital technology? So I hope that COVID also help us to move forward digital solutions that really make a difference and improve the coordination of clinical trials. So I think we are there at a like AI. You can connect that also. We are talking to companies to connect AI to finding patients and then make it a link to recruiting trials. A lot of opportunities there. So I think we also need to support the physicians and especially the clinical trial managers, who are looking up to a huge amount of administrative burden to move those new trials in. And that's, if we can reduce that by 75 or 80%, that's what we hear back from our first movers, that the clinical trial manager who helped us to set up the system. They have been end users, they have been helped us with building that platform. And they say that administrative burden by digitalizing and harmonizing can be reduced by 75 or 80%. So now they can really spend time on, getting the patients in and assisting the physicians with all the logistics about that really is required to make those trials happen, and collect the right data, and set an appointment for the CT scan, because that's the work that really needs to be done. So I hope that COVID will help us also forward with embracing digital solutions that really matter. Time will tell.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, indeed. I think we all hope that it will, the culture change will last. So sort of following up on that, I think it's very interesting indeed, the point that was raised to include more sites in order to reach more patients. And I'm just very curious, maybe Jimmy, so how does it work at Bayer? So how does feasibility work, and do you think, so is it already applied that there's extra sites involved either for the entire study or to take over only the screening or just certain safety measures of the trial?
Yeah, thanks, Tess. I think, given Srini's example, Bayer takes very similar approaches. We're already implementing DCT, but I think for oncology, it is appearing to be more challenging. There isn't a whole lot of output or literature that's supporting where you can take more decentralized models. I think when it comes to our approaches, we definitely vet the sites very carefully. That's something that's really come into focus as far as their digital capabilities. If it's something that is really rate limiting when it comes to those factors, then we have to really consider these sites. I think for the larger institutions of academia, they're really, advanced in comparison to some of the smaller niche community sort of backgrounds. I think when it comes to oncology, we're looking at more targeted therapies and those approaches where you're looking at certain diagnostics and testing that may limit some of these sites when it comes to some of the mutational testings or the bio sampling that we look at, really specifically within oncology. So that definitely poses a challenge for it. If we can get some of these large institutions that have networks, I think to Srini's comment, we tend to see better output with some of the networks versus some of the more independent, smaller sites. So I think, again, you have to really look at the evaluation and the capabilities of the sites and how we can support them from a sponsor level, and looking some of the other components that might help with the burden when it comes to some of the novel approach that Srini comments to, as well as Edwin. So I think it really will depend on the site, but we have to cast very wide nets from a sponsor perspective to making sure that we do get some of those sites, even though they may not have the large institutional monikers or reputations, they can provide just as good service and research.
Indeed. So it's very interesting that you mention, because that's something that we also see at iClusion, that these networks tend to work really well. And so I have an idea, but I'm curious, what's your idea? Why do you think this works so much better if a site indeed is connected to a larger network?
I think it's accessibility for one, and typically these networks are really standardized or regimented. I think which helps. I think in the U.S., a lot of that may be driven by our healthcare system. I think in the EU, you might have more success with sort of screening facilities and centers. I'm not sure if that's quite an approach we could take in the U.S., but again, I think as with these larger networks, they make themselves much more standardized and I think efficient, and provide those technologies to the smaller satellite sites or centers that may not have the larger capability, but will at least have access within a larger institution that's within proximity.
And do you then also see this model? That's something that I am very interested in, is that the more complex measurements are still taking place at the primary study site, but then these satellite sites can take over certain simpler, so only parts of the trial. Is this something that you see, or are only the satellite sites used for the entire study?
I think it varies and depends, Tess, but I think to your comment, much of the significant diagnostics are occurring at the larger institutions, especially with PK sampling. A lot of these smaller places just aren't set up. I mean, a lot of it is just logistical operations. So that definitely brings a certain level of complexity. But I think where we can demonstrate where some of the less involved testing is involved, it's really beneficial for patients to do the telemedicine, the offsite lab draws or what have you, or even the patient to doctor visits. So again, I think it will determine and be based on the site's capabilities overall.
Right, right. Thanks. And Srini, also to that point, so I'm also curious to hear about the selection of the number of sites, because we all know that feasibility is often, from the site's perspective, is often a bit too high. So do you include more sites than is according to the feasibility needed? How does this work? How many sites would you typically include?
Well, I can quote you some numbers from the CDC website. I'm told that 11% of all sites that are engaged for a study do not even recruit a single patient. Of the 89% that do, most sites complete their target enrollment only when the study timelines are doubled or increased, let's put it so. So to mitigate this risk, sponsors usually over-engage sites. I'm told it's as much as 70%. So you need 100, they will engage 170 sites. Well, that adds to both the financial cost as well as the length of the study. And the opportunity cost from being late to market can be pretty huge, as much as $600K or $8 million a day for blockbuster drugs. So there's a lot of money on the table. So at Genentech, we have implemented an AI machine learning model where we predict sites that have the most potential to run the study for us. So we use both internal and external data sources with a lot of other factors to predict how a site is likely to perform in your next study in, for example, let's say lung cancer. Right? So we look at our studies, the milestones that were achieved, the enrollment numbers that were achieved. We look at the turnaround time in IRB. We look at the time it takes to activate the site, enroll the first patient, the length of the enrollment itself. So a lot of factors go into building the machine learning model. On top of it, we look at the available patients who filed claims, right? And then if you're targeting, for example, a certain ethnicity, diversity, we look at publicly available data sources from census.gov, or for example, I'm pretty sure there will be similar kind of data sources outside of US as well. So yeah, a lot of data sources go into making the machine learning model that then produces an output, say, okay, here are some good sites for your next study. And those are the sites we should target. So we kind of mitigate the risk. Though we continue to over-engage the number of sites, we do not, we do not over-engage by 70% like we used to earlier. So we are intelligently picking sites and principal investigators as well. Principal investigators who've been there, conducted studies, have made created publications that we can all have access to. We look at investigators who are strongly affiliated with one site or are affiliated to other secondary sites or network sites that we are interested in. So a lot of data does go into making the site selection tool. On top of it, we also have the study forecasting tool. So for example, if a site is, let's say, 2 months into enrollment time and they've enrolled X number of patients, then we have a prediction algorithm that predicts how many patients is a site likely to enroll over the next few months. So that helps us in making strategic decisions about the site. Like, should we keep the site because it's important to us, or should we push the site and cut our losses and look for additional sites? We also look at competitors, right? If the site could be good, it could be performing exceedingly well, but if there are so many competitors that it's unlikely that this site may perform well, then we have some decisions to make. The strategic site, then we might want to extend the time at the site, give it the option to perform. And then through our rideshare health program, we bring patients to the site. I mean, we help the patients financially. We have a door-to-door transportation model where we bring the patients to the site. So they are patients who are apprehensive of visiting the site can go confidently to the site. We also provide childcare services through an external vendor. Yeah, so we've done what it takes from a process perspective, from a design perspective. All of our trials are COVID ready, so we have cut down the time it would probably take, the back and forth, right? So the COVID language is already there, sites have been made available. And previously, and also I think the change in processes on the IRB side, we found that it was easier to work with central IRB. Not that the IRB process has caused too much concern, but we tend to favor sites that have used central IRB. And since we are engaging with a lot of sites, IRB can take significantly long and impact timeline for the study.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So Domenico, I'm very curious how you are, for such large studies, how you are selecting sites. Do you also over engage? Are you also looking at recruitment rates of sites?
So I've been working closely over the last, let's say 10 years at least, in close with patients groups, patient associations. One thing that we need to be very careful though is not to create too false expectations, not to generate too much awareness. For instance, I'm quite familiar with placebo-controlled studies, and what we must avoid is to really raise disease awareness across the therapeutic areas we work on, but not to over exceed on that with that approach, because we will boost inevitably, the placebo response at the end. Is one of the big challenges that we see in pain, in neuropathy pain area, and I've seen in many other therapeutic areas I worked on before. I would like to say that disease awareness is important. So is generating more awareness helps patients, helps their families to get more actively engaged and becoming potentially more willing to participate in clinical studies. But inevitably, COVID-19 has been a massive challenge. As I said, we need to learn also some lessons from this. And one of these lessons, certainly all my colleagues will agree, is to simplify our clinical study designs. So make sure, that we create those requirements and conditions that make the life of these people easier, because they are already suffering from cancer, from many other life-threatening conditions and comorbidities. And we also have to engage closely with our regulators, because our regulators are also there to help us to design the most appropriate studies. And also they are showing flexibility also in terms of postponing or stretching timelines over in adult studies, also in pediatric studies. And I'm involved in both, so, and it's important. We want to make sure that that relationship is also kept very much alive with our regulators. So patient groups, patient regulators, our sites, working closely with CROs, making sure that the feasibility assessment of sites is appropriate, timelines are appropriate, and we have to work on so many platforms, and at the end what it matters really is to make life of people easier to come into the clinical studies and then to stay in the clinical studies, because we don't want to lose them, particularly if we have the potential of good beneficial molecules that they can take, and hopefully at the end they will benefit from during the studies, but also after the studies, when hopefully these drugs are approved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, so maybe to Edwin, I'm also very curious. So of course, one best way to give more access to patients of clinical trials is that oncologists also refer patients to trials maybe in a neighboring center. Now, this is something that iClusion is involved in. So what I hear often is that people are afraid that oncologists will not refer their patients. How do you? What is your vision on this? Did you see this change? Do you have any opinion?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Is the political correct answer. Usually they don't like to refer patients, but if it's the only option and it's close by, you know, they should take care of the patients, they will refer. But it's not common good, I would say. It's interesting what Jimmy and Sri are saying, and also Domenico, is that what we can see now while we are on the move, trying to create a better access and recruitment of patients and better accessibility, is indeed those networks are very important. What we now see is, from my former life in the CRO, we try to have a feasibility study, trying to use all data that we can on performance of study sites that we have, new data on specific aberrations. AI certainly is helping there, and searching electronic health records. So AI and those searching tools will help to identify patients, but identify patients is not recruiting a patient. And actually what we are moving now into, which is quite successfully, is a feasibility that is not done on paper and on searching, and then select your hospitals. What we and you might over select hospitals that will not deliver, and you have to close them down. It's costly, it's timely. What we see now in collaboration with the sites and with our sponsors is that we have a network with some big good sites with smaller hospitals in the neighborhood, but still good. And what we now do is try to make it a real-time on-demand feasibility. So with a small fee, you can put a feasibility protocol in the network and set it out. So the physicians and the patients, if they run out of a standardized treatment and they need to go into experimental treatment, and they see if they are having a certain biomarker, they might enter into a study. The study is there, it's on our site, so they can access it. Then we run a feasibility study real life. So the sponsor needs to pay a certain amount, which is not a big amount compared to the whole study, which endorses the physicians and the patients to really go into the screening. And now you will get in the network real life screening data. So now it's not AI running, you know, there might be a probability in those hospitals, the patients will be there. And then I see with leukemia in the past when I run trials, sometimes for months I didn't see a child coming into our hospital when I was doing my research, and then suddenly within 1 month 5 patients come in. It's quite unpredictable. But now what you can do in your network is set out the feasibility, if it's all accessible with good technology, run a biosample, screen for it, and when the screening is positive, there is a real life patient who also might fits the in and exclusion criteria, because the physician has checked before he will run this feasibility, this screening, will the patient, if he is positive, can he go into the trial? And now there are 2 opportunities. Either such a hospital in the network find 2 or 3 patients, and you might want to include that hospital into your network, which we can do really fast within 1 to 2 months, because everything is standardized. So now you have a well-selected hospital added to your recruitment services, or they might refer to the central hospital in the network. So there are 2 chances there. So I think what could be a future forward, and we are doing it right now, is really to make the feasibility real-time with a small fee for the physicians and the centers. And then you are sure that from a sponsor side, that if the biosample is positive, the patient is there, and he might, with a high certainty, move into the in and exclusion criteria. I always know with oncology, you know, if 1 or 2 or 3 weeks pass, sometimes in and exclusion criteria might not be met anymore because of liver functions deteriorating. So, you know, it's not 100% guarantee, but it's a high probability, 90%, that this patient really might move into the site. So I think that's a really interesting idea, how we can work together with sponsors, us, the site network, to increase that. So here I see decentralization work to really find real life patients. It will increase efficiency.
I definitely agree, and it's but I'm also very curious to hear the thoughts of the other panelists, especially because Srini, indeed, the statistics that you mentioned is that there's 11% of the sites that do not recruit any patients, and in this model, indeed, that wouldn't be too bad, because you have you haven't paid the full study startup price. So I'm very curious to, because you mentioned the AI predictive tool, Srini, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. But before, I'm also very curious, Jimmy, in your experience, do you use predictive tools at all? And how do you think, what do you think about the model of opening up a sort of a just-in-time network?
Yeah, I think we're getting there. I mean, I think we have our own versions of AI as well. We've used just-in-time models before. I think it will depend, I think largely on the protocol itself, and to Domenico's point, how friendly it is to patients. I mean, we're seeing the need and really stressing that from, I think, industry perspective and sponsor perspective. So I think sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I think it just, you know, the variables are really inconsistent on maybe the needs of the trial, but I think they have their place for sure. But I think you're going to see more AI drive a lot of the knowledge of how we select the sites, the projections for recruitment deliverables, things of that nature. So it's becoming more aware and visible, and I really do see this as the way moving forward when it comes to our trials.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks a lot. And also, I think indeed connecting the electronic health records to these predictive tools and to find patients instantly is very promising. So Srini, also coming back to Edwin's point, and especially I'm just super curious, since you're working on this predictive tool, how well does it actually predict feasibility? And can you share a bit on that?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So our site selection tool has been live for a few months only. In fact, it has been implemented in the US, and we're looking to scale it globally as well. But again, a tool is only as good as the data that can be fed to it, the quality of the data, the amount of data, right? And you do not have any labels to say this particular site has done exceedingly well. It's in comparison to other studies. So there is no teacher's answer saying this is the best site or study. So, and one problem with the AI model is, again, I do not have historical information to say which was the best study. So it's kind of relative ranking. And the AI model will only improve with time as more data is fed to it. It's going to learn from additional data that's fed. We also are implementing, actually, we're still in the works. We're implementing the teacher's answer or a feedback loop, because not all of the information is captured in systems. It could be in persons, in the mind of certain people who have probably applied for their own studies. Historically, they've been doing this offline. So none of this information is captured. So the feedback loop into the AI model will not only influence the model to predict better, but that information will be available for others to see as well and share. Yeah. So yeah, the AI model has a long way to go. But again, the AI model can do so much once it predicts the sites. A lot of things can change at the site over time. So once the sites have been identified and contracted. So I would say more important is the study monitoring or forecasting tools. So if something does change, and it changes on a daily basis, if something does change in and around the site, whether it's regarding to the patients or the nature of the study, because of which we are unable to find the right patients, or whether competitors themselves, right? If there is a competing drug that has been proven and patients are likely to be more involved in those studies. So we have to
that can also happen.
And locations. So yeah. So.
Yeah. So. No, that's true. All right. Yeah, and then I think I see Mark joining the panel, which means that we'll go to the audience questions soon. But before that, one final question to Domenico, if that's all right, Mark?
Sure, of course it is, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm also very curious in your experience, Domenico, just the digital technologies in general. So whether that's AI, but also I'm just curious if you can share a lot about these digital measurements that you've used, because you mentioned that it's the PROs mostly. So can you share a bit about your experience as well?
Yes, ePro system, yes, we used in a large phase 3 program this electronic device is given to the patient, given to the sites, so the sites could closely capture the data from the patient themselves, because as you know, in many therapeutic areas, there is always the issue of missing data or inaccuracy of data, so which have a big impact on in quality at the end. And data quality is one of the major issues from clinical studies. One thing I would like also to say, in addition to that, because we've been talking about how we make sure to have patients entering the studies, we must remember also how can we make sure to retain patients in the clinical studies, because retention is another big challenge. It's not just getting the patients in the studies, but make sure that they continue during the course of the study. And one thing is paramount is to closely follow patient safety, because all available drugs carry in oncology, but in many other areas, a particular level of toxicity. So that has to be done as before. So no change, no impact from COVID, but the same level of attention that we always put into patient safety. So that unfortunately cannot be modified.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. All right. So Mark, I think, does this mean we have to answer the audience questions?
Yeah, so we still have 5 minutes left. So at this point, I'd still encourage the audience, if you do have any questions, just drop them in the questions box. I do have a couple that have been sent privately over to me, so maybe I'll start with one of those questions. And then if anybody has any new questions, just pop them in the box and we'll be able to read them out. So like I said, we do have 4 or 5 minutes left. So the question is, so it's costly and time consuming to open new sites. How can we overcome this?
Is there anyone who would like to jump in on the issue of opening new sites? Edwin?
I put on my mic. Yeah, that's one of the things we try to do, is reduce the administrative burden in starting up a site for the study sites. That really is a big issue. And by digitalizing the process and standardizing the modules of the forms and the documents we need, centrally based. So if there is one document needs to be changed, we can just upload it and replace it after sponsor approval in the document repository, and then all sites immediately are up to the new site. And working together with the trial managers, what we have found out is that once they are standardized, digitalized, and harmonized on the procedures, and we help them with that, that's a lot of effort we put in, they can really start up easily within 1 to 2 months. And that reduces the amount of time. So I think by just using the digital processes and harmonized procedures, what we can do is we can really drive down the cost because of efficiencies. I think we can start up 10 trials or 10 sites within 2 months at the cost of setting up one trial that may take 6 months. And that's what you can do with the digital. And we work closely with the sponsor to make sure that once we put the approval process on all the documents, there needs to be an internal round by the sponsor that all the information is accurate. It's solved. We will make sure that GCP processes are followed according to local rules and GCP rules. So that's confined with the site. Content needs to be jointly collaborated together and make sure it's 100% accurate. And so we have seen a tremendous speed up there with more sites, faster speed up at lower cost. We have examples of that. So it can be done.
Yeah, and Tess, just to add to that.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think Edwin raises a lot of good points here. I think the technology needs to come to some more maturity, I think, maybe the market itself, because I think even with some of the components where we do request remote access to sites, which we get, but you see so many variations of cost where some sites may charge $5,000 where others may charge $1,200. So I think there's those factors as well that drive this, but I think, you know, we have to come to some more standardization when it comes to these components that Edwin's just described. But I think, you know, the technology really needs to mature a bit more.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I would like to add my 2 cents here. So a new site to us is twofold. It could be a new site that nobody has worked with, or a site that we haven't worked with, but a competitor has. So we tend to actually look at the second category more often because they have been there, done that. It's just that we haven't reached out to those sites. So we use our MSLs exclusively, MSLs who are responsible for a certain region in the US. They help build partnerships with these sites and influence the sites or make them sure, make it sure that they can run the study for us. So the feedback loop is always there from the MSL as well as the partnership building.
I might also add that I found extremely valuable the investigator meetings that were run at the time of the phase 3 program I was mentioning earlier in different regions, and dedicating specific training sessions to the investigators and the site, and they were very, very interested, very actively involved, and those training sessions are extremely valuable to make sure, you know, technologies are get up and running, and people are fully trained to carry out and use these new technologies.
Yeah, indeed, and I think especially in the start of a study, this can take quite some time, which is good to indeed. I think it's a really great approach to, as Srini said, also include MSLs here.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting conclusion, a great end to this very interesting panel. Mark, any last words maybe to close up the session?
No, I'd just like to echo what you said. I think, you know, I've not been visible on screen, but I have been behind the scenes and I have been listening, and it's great to see so many people passionate about the topic. I think it's been very insightful, and I'd just like to thank everybody for joining. Thank you to all the audience for taking the time to tune in, and thank you to all of you guys, Tess for moderating, Edwin, Srinivas, Jimmy, and Domenico. Very much appreciated. I'm sure your insights were very well received, and I hope we get to work together again at some point in the future. Very quick reminder for the attendees, immediately after the session you'll receive a survey. We would appreciate any feedback about the discussion, anything you would like to change, any topics you would like to be discussed next time round, and you'll also receive a copy of the recording post-event as well, which will be sent directly to you. Other than that, unless you've got anything else to say, Tess, I think we can conclude.
No, I'd just like to thank all the panelists very much for your great insight, and all the attendees. Thank you so much for tuning in, and looking forward to continue this discussion offline and collaborate to really accelerate clinical trials in oncology. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.